So Julian Assange is being charged under something called the Espionage Act. Now, what's the Espionage Act? The Espionage Act is a piece of legislation that can be traced back to the First World War. It was then resurrected in the Second World War. And it's a pretty broad and vague piece of legislation that basically says that if you do anything that compromises the security state of the United States, that's against the law. Now, again, it was written in the context of a world war. We were in a world war when this was written. Then it was resurrected again in the Second World War and was intended to be enforced against Nazi spies. So again, I just want to emphasize a little bit. This is the context with how this legislation was brought into existence. The context of a world war, and in the second time, a war against literal Nazis, a world war where we were fighting literal Nazis. Okay, that's the context of this legislation. It has no bearing whatsoever on today's society, nor was it ever intended to be used against a publisher who publishes information for the benefit of the public. But now, that's what the Espionage Act is used for. When you take it in the context of today and you recognize the U.S. empire for what it is, well, what is the Espionage Act being used against? Well, it's being used against whistleblowers and people who publish whistleblowers, which is the category Julian Assange falls into. He publishes whistleblowers. So they're charging him under this absolutely bogus charge that has no bearing on today's society. So right away, these charges are pretty ridiculous. A lot of the stuff that he published over the years was also at one point published by The Guardian, of all places. So sometimes, oh, well, he published stuff that endangered people. Really? Well, The Guardian published the same stuff. Should they be in trouble? No, just him. Not The Guardian, although The Guardian's finally coming out and saying that that this case is ridiculous, that he should be free. And so they're publishing him under that act. Now, they're also trying to say that he, quote, hacked something, because if you hack something, if you just publish something, that's not against the law, at least not in the United States. If you publish documentation, that's not against the law unless you try to make a stress with the Espionage Act, which is what they're doing. But generally speaking, that breaks zero laws in the United States. Nor is it against the law to say, hey, this was kind of cool. Can you get me more of this stuff to somebody who got the information for you? That's also not against the law in the United States if you are a journalist or publisher. It is against the law if you illegally hack something. So they're trying to say that Julian Assange illegally hacked something. There's no evidence that he did. They tortured Chelsea Manning for years to try to get a confession out of her, saying that Julian Assange helped her hack something. She still has not given that confession, probably because it never happened. I don't know about you, but if somebody helped me hack something and then I was tortured for 6 years, I'd probably spill the beans. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But also, in the Julian Assange case, who is their star witness here? So they have some testimonies against the guy, and who's their star guy in this? Well, I'll tell you, it's a guy named Sigurdar Thordarson. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name, but who is Sigurdar? Well, he is a guy from Iceland. He is, first of all, a convicted sex criminal and pedophile, and he was eventually caught embezzling money from WikiLeaks. He was at one point a colleague of Julian Assange. He was caught embezzling money from WikiLeaks. He embezzled over $50,000, or the equivalent of $50,000. And it was also later revealed that starting in 2014, he was an informant for the FBI. So he was an informant against Julian Assange for years. He's their star witness. He's also a con artist. He's embezzled in a ton of other situations. Convicted sex criminal and pedophile. This is their guy, by the way, which, there's a few character questions here. So how has that been going with them, with their star witness? Well, about a year ago, he admitted that everything he said was a freaking lie. Everything he said against Julian Assange was a lie. So that's where we're at. Now, when that happened, you might ask, like, well, why wasn't everything just dropped? Well, because this case has been ridiculous beyond comprehension this entire time. Why would anything frickin' change now? So that's what's going on with Julian Assange. And a lot of general people, they don't really know any of the stuff I just said. Because why? The corporate media is not going to report on that. They're just going to report like, oh, he helped Trump win and blah, 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 which again, there's no evidence of that being the case, that Julian Assange wanted to help Trump win. Well, let's get to the article. So this is what the New York Times had to say. We have the New York Times directly addressing this. News outlets urge the U.S. to drop charges against Julian Assange. This is from the New York Times. In a joint letter, news organizations warned that the indictment of Julian Assange sets a dangerous precedent that could chill reporting about matters of national security. Yeah, that's putting it gently. The New York Times and 4 European news organizations called on the United States government on Monday to drop its charges against Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, for obtaining and publishing classified diplomatic and military secrets. In a joint open letter, the Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, and El Pais said the persecution of Mr. Assange under the Espionage Act sets a dangerous precedent that threatened to undermine the First Amendment and the freedom of the press. We'll go ahead and read this quote. Obtaining and disclosing sensitive information when necessary in the public interest is a core part of the daily work of journalists, the letter said. If that work is criminalized, our public discourse and our democracies are made significantly weaker. So it's interesting that it has taken them this long. It has taken them this long to finally come out and say this. I'm glad they're doing it. I'll take it. But it's amazing it took them this long. And we're not going to read the entire New York Times piece, but even at some point in that piece, they even repeat the thing, Julian Assange published the Democratic emails that came from the Russians that helped Trump win. Okay, so first of all, we don't know where those emails came from because WikiLeaks never divulges a source. WikiLeaks never gives away a source. So we don't know where those emails came from. We do know that those emails are real. The DNC emails were real emails. Now, there are some people who think those emails were fake. They're not. They're real emails. Also, another side note, WikiLeaks has never had to retract a document. It has never happened. Also, the whole, oh, well, Julian Assange, and by the way, I was told, I didn't read this myself, but I saw things on Twitter where apparently in the New York Times comment section, a bunch of people are going nuts. Like, no, Julian Assange gave us Trump and blah, blah, blah. Listen to yourself. First of all, there's no evidence, none whatsoever, that Julian Assange had any fondness for Donald Trump. Second of all, even if he did, which again, there's no evidence that he did, but even if he did, even if Julian Assange published documents for the public good and he wanted Trump to be president, even if that is the case, which there's no evidence that it is, but even if it is, does that justify torturing the guy for 7 freaking years? You know who helped, quote unquote, help Donald Trump out? All of the political pundits who supported him, all the people who voted for him. Do you think everybody who supported Trump deserves to be tortured for 7 years? Deserves to be away from their family in solitary confinement with hard stones put in their food? You think somebody deserves that because they supported Donald Trump? Which, and by the way, again, I'm not trying to get in the weeds here because there's no evidence that that's even the case. Julian Assange, for pretty much his entire life, has lived by the virtue that people need to know the truth even when it's inconvenient. That's I'm paraphrasing a quote there, but that's like kind of the rule that Julian Assange has lived by for most of his life, where it's like whatever the truth is, people need to know it, even if it's an inconvenient truth. Now, maybe you personally disagree with that. Maybe you don't. Maybe you do agree with it. But either way, that's the standard this guy lives by. Has nothing to do with, oh, he's trying to help Trump out. It has everything to do with, here's something the public should know about. And by the way, those documents were legitimate. So if you want to blame those emails for Donald Trump, your grievance is not with Julian Assange. Your grievance is with the DNC, who put their thumb on the scale for Hillary Clinton and screwed over Bernie Sanders, who, let's be honest, would have beat Trump. So take it up with the DNC, not Julian Assange. Julian Assange should be free, and he should be with his wife and kid. So it's amazing it's come to this point. It really is.